Hello, viewers and subscribers. Welcome to Blackford's Art of Learning. In today's sixth grade lesson, we will continue our lesson on RI 6.9, comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with that of another. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So welcome to middle school. Let us follow our learning pathway. And today's quote is, "If opportunity doesn't knock, build a door," by Milton Berle. And we're comparing and contrasting one author's presentation of events with that of another, because maybe one author has a specific purpose of writing in comparison to the other. One author might be writing to give information, another might be writing to entertain, one might be writing to explain something, another might be writing to persuade, one author may be writing to describe something, while one author may be writing to answer a question. So authors have various purposes for writing. And if we use the PIDE acronym, we can remember PIDE: P for persuade, I for inform, E for entertain, and the other E can be to explain. Okay, those are the author's purpose for writing. So let us go ahead and view these anchor charts. It says get pied in author's purpose. So P for persuade, the author tries to convince the reader of something. For example, an article about how to help save an endangered animal. The author may be persuading people to save endangered animals. I for inform, the author gives information about a topic, and this is usually a non-fiction book. And an example could be a non-fiction book with animal facts. Explain, the author writes the steps the reader will follow. Directions on how to build a birdhouse can be an example. Entertain, the author writes something the reader will enjoy. For example, a fiction book with characters, plots, etc. Describe, the author uses some of the senses to tell about a topic. For example, an essay about the sights, sounds, and smells of a favorite place. Here's another author's purpose chart. The author could be writing to answer a question, to describe, or to explain. So for answer, the author starts with a question. Author uses facts to draw conclusions. To describe, the author uses adverbs and adjectives, uses the five senses, lots of details about one topic. And explain, the author will be showing how to do something, a step-by-step process using diagrams and action verbs. Okay, so let us now move on to our instructional video comparing two authors' perspectives.
Today we're going to work on the learning target. I can compare and contrast one author's presentation of events with that of another. Today we have two articles. Both of them are about Amelia Earhart. One of them is by Brian Vargas and one of them is by Anne Randall. They're both biographies, so they're the same genre, which means we're going to have to look at the specific details within each one to try to uncover each of the author's perspectives and then see how their perspectives are slightly different. So let's start with our first one. As a famous female aviator, Amelia Earhart did much to advance equality for women. In 1928, she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic and spent the rest of her life fearlessly flying farther, faster. Earhart was the first to fly many long, dangerous routes, and she encouraged other women to fly. She championed women in the sciences as a guest professor at Purdue University. She said, "Women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others." Our second article, Born to Fly. Amelia Earhart didn't always dream of becoming an aviator. While she had seen airplanes growing up, it wasn't until her early 20s that she realized she was born to fly. When Earhart was 20 years old, she and a friend attended a stunt flying contest. Their fun ended, however, when one of the planes came zooming toward them. In spite of the danger, Earhart stood firm, displaying the same fearlessness that she would continue to show all her life. This encounter proved to be a sign of things to come. Just a few years later, Earhart found herself flying inside an airplane. On December 28, 1920, pilot Frank Hawks changed Earhart's life by taking her on her first plane ride. It was then that she knew she was meant to be in the air. Earhart attended her first flying lesson just 5 days later, and by 1922 she was already setting records. She became the first woman to fly to an altitude of 14,000 feet. Over the next 15 years, Earhart would continue to make her mark on the record books time and time again, proving that flying was truly in her blood. So the first thing we want to do is find how the two articles are the same. In both articles, we're obviously talking about Amelia Earhart. And in both articles, we can see that Earhart is portrayed as an aviator, which just means that she is a flyer. In both articles, whether they use the exact same words or not, it talks about Earhart was the first to do something, that she was kind of a record setter. So in this article, it talks about how she can set records. And in this one, it says basically the same thing when it talks about she was the first to fly many long, dangerous routes. So that's kind of how it talks about how she does things the same. It also talks about how she's fearless in this one, and in this one it talks about how she has fearlessness. So those are the similarities in the two articles. Now that we know how the articles are the same, we want to look at how the articles are different, because that'll kind of reveal to us how the authors have slightly different perspectives. The first thing that I noticed that is different is the title. On this one, it talks about how Earhart on equality. And there's a word that appears in this article over and over and over again. On this one, it talks about how she was a famous female aviator and how she was trying to advance equality for women. She talks about how she was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic and how she was trying to do that, she was encouraging other women to fly, how she was championing women in the sciences, and how she said that women must try to do things that men should do, and if they fail, that she have to challenge others, and when they talk about challenging others, they meant challenging other women. This article seemed to be less about what Earhart had done herself, but more about what she had encouraged other women to do, and even the title talks about that, where it's equality for women. So while this article does talk about how Amelia Earhart was an aviator who had set records and was fearless, it's really more about how she was a champion for women's rights. And so the purpose of this article was more about how she was helping women's rights movement. Let's compare that to the second article. Amelia Earhart didn't always dream to be an aviator, but when she was challenged in the stunt flying competition, it kind of changed her perspective on the world. So she had this plane come zooming at her, and then she stood firm, and that kind of changed her perspective on the world, and later she became a pilot. So it says in December 28th, a pilot changed her perspective on life, so Earhart's life. Took her up on a plane. She knew she was meant to be up in the air. She attended her first flying lesson 5 days later. She was the first woman to fly to an altitude. So it does talk about women here, but notice in this this article, it talks about female, woman, 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 woman. That word came up lots of times. This is the first time that word woman came up in this article. It says over the next 15 years, she continued to make her mark on the record books time and time again, and that flying was truly in her blood. In this particular article, it seems to be more of just a sequence of events in her life. This seems to be more of a true biography of the things that happened in Amelia Earhart's life. So if I want to compare and contrast the two articles, there's some things that I have to point out that are the same. Between the two articles, if I wanted to say what is the same, I would say that they're both about Amelia Earhart, who was an aviator, who set records, who was fearless, and did many amazing things. But if I want to compare and contrast now and look at what's different, it seems that this first article is more about how Amelia Earhart was a champion for women's rights. The second article didn't seem to have that same perspective or that same theme. This seemed to be more of a true biography that was just giving facts on her life. Knowing that the perspective is different on the two articles, I would read them for a slightly different reason. If I was wanting to learn more about the outcome or the impact of her life, I might choose this first article. This really talked about how Amelia Earhart changed the lives of other people, how she was able to impact the lives of women and move them forward throughout history. If I just wanted to know how she was able to have an impact on her own life and the details of her specific life, I might choose the second article because it's more about the sequence of events in her own life. So today we worked on comparing and contrast one author's presentations of events with that of another. There are similarities. They're both about Amelia Earhart and how she's an aviator who did amazing things and was very fearless. However, the perspective of the two authors is slightly different, and therefore they presented facts slightly different. This one had fewer details because it wasn't focusing on all the details of her life. It was more so just about how she was a champion for women's rights, and therefore it only really included the details that were on how she helped women's rights. This one, because it was more of a broad picture of a biography, included more details of her life and had a true sequence of events. When you want to compare and contrast these details, you have to look first for how the details are the same, and then look for the specific details that are different. And when you find those details, it will give you a greater insight into the perspective of the specific authors.
Okay, boys and girls, I hope you have listened carefully to the comparison of these two texts about the pilot, Amelia Earhart. Okay, and we notice in the first one, they gave a memoir of her life. And in the other one, they gave more facts and information about her life. Okay, so let's move on to our next activity. Now we're going to do a flip grid. And in this flip grid, we are now required to describe some examples of author's purpose. What are some reasons authors write? Okay, so you would click on the record button, but before you start recording, usually you have to think about what is expected of you and how you're going to present your information. So you want to allow. So what you would do is think about the topic. You are supposed to describe the author's purpose in a text. What are some purposes or reasons why authors write? So let us look at an example of a video. Hello, everyone. I will be describing some reasons authors write or author's purpose for writing. So there are a number of reasons why authors write. They write to persuade, inform, entertain, or explain. They also write to answer questions and to describe. So, for information, authors usually write to provide facts about events or things. For persuade, they want to convince the reader about something. They want to persuade them about something. To entertain, they want to provide some form of amusement for the reader. Okay? In order to explain, they are providing steps to follow for a particular procedure. Okay? And to answer a question, the author is trying to provide information that may answer a particular question. Okay, everyone, so you can go ahead and pause the video and you can record your response to the question about what are the different reasons authors write or the author's purpose. Now let's continue our lesson. We're going to learn more about our topic. And we are going to use the picker wheel as usual to choose someone who is going to read for us today. So today, Trent will be reading. All right. All right, so here are some key vocabulary that you need to know from the text. You're going to go ahead and pause the video and record what you think these words mean. So go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so the word realistic means having or showing a sensible and practical idea of what can be achieved or expected. Adolescent of a young person in the process of developing from a child into an adult. Impression, an idea, feeling, or opinion about something or someone, especially one formed with conscious thought or on the basis of little evidence. Clarified, made a statement or situation less confused and more clearly comprehensible. Subtle means not loud, bright, noticeable, or obvious in any way. Rendition, the act or result of rendering something, such as a performance or interpretation of something. Outwit, to get an advantage over someone by acting more cleverly and often by using a trick. All right, so we are going to do our lesson, Stan Lee and Spider-Man, and we're going to compare this story to another version. And we're doing page 185 to 188 in our iReady textbook. So once you click on the link, you'll go to Classkick. All right. And remember, we are going to have Trent read for us. Read the 2 articles about the creation of Spider-Man, then answer the questions that follow. Spider-Man is a popular comic book superhero who continues to delight his fans some 50 years after his creation. In the autobiography Excelsior, The Amazing Life of Stan, his creator Stan Lee explains his version of how Spider-Man came to life. Stan Lee had been working in the comic book business for over 20 years. He wanted to create a hero who had a realistic life in addition to superpowers. Lee presented his idea to his boss and publisher, Martin Goodman. I told Martin I wanted to feature a hero who had just a touch of super strength, but his main power was that he could stick to walls and ceilings, Lee says. Lee explained that his hero, Spider-Man, would also be a normal teenager. Spider-Man would be raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben and have all the normal problems of an adolescent. The hero would be worried about money, allergies, girls, and anything else that Lee could think of. According to Lee, the creation of Spider-Man had sprung from his reading as a child. One of his favorite magazines was called The Spider, Master of Men, and Lee loved that name. He remembers the character wearing a slouch hat and a special spider ring. If the spider hit someone, he would leave the impression of a spider on his victim. Although Lee remembers the spider vividly, he clarified that this character never had superpowers like Spider-Man. According to Lee, Martin Goodman hated this idea. Goodman felt that a superhero couldn't be a teenager with personal problems. He said that Spider-Man seemed more like a comedy character than a powerful superhero. Since most people don't like spiders, Goodman thought that the name Spider-Man was a terrible choice. But Lee couldn't give up on his idea of Spider-Man. He gave artist Jack Kirby a plot line for Spider-Man and asked him to illustrate it. As Lee tells it, Jack started to draw, but when I saw that he was making our main character, Peter Parker, a powerful looking, handsome, self-confident, typical hero type, I realized that wasn't the style I was looking for. So I took Jack off the project. He couldn't care less because he had so many other strips to draw at the time, and Spider-Man wasn't exactly our top of the line character. Lee reassigned the project to Steve Ditko, who used a more subtle and stylized drawing. Ditko's rendition was exactly what Lee had in mind. They finished the comic strip and it was published in the last issue of Amazing Fantasy in 1962. When sales figures of that publication came in, they showed that Spider-Man issue was a huge success. According to Lee, Goodman ran into Lee's office to congratulate him. To congratulate himself and Lee on the new character. Lee says, I can still hear his now classic comment. Stan, remember that Spider-Man idea of yours that I like so much? Why don't we turn it into a series? Spider-Man became one of the most successful comic book characters ever. When Spider-Man headed up Marvel comic books line of heroes, sales increased from 7 million copies in 1961 to 13 million copies in 1962. After Steve Ditko stopped drawing Spider-Man, artist John Romita took over. He slowly incorporated his own style, and Peter became tall and handsome as he grew up. The characters gradually took on a new look, and the Spider-Man comic strip continued to increase in popularity. All right, so that's the first version of the story. All right, so let us go ahead and read the second version. The Birth of Spider-Man by Max Bruno. What do you think of when you hear the name Spider-Man? A superhero who can cling to almost anything, devices that shoot spider webs, a spider sense to outwit enemies? Since his appearance in the early 1960s, Spider-Man has been different than other comic book superheroes. Initially, he was a teenager who had to deal with loneliness, rejection, and other realistic problems. Over the years, Peter Parker went to college, got married, taught high school, and became a freelance photographer. By 2011, he had become a member of two superhero teams, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. But how did Spider-Man crawl into existence? In his autobiography, Excelsior, The Amazing Life of Stan Lee, Lee explains his version of the birth of Spider-Man. Stan Lee had been working in the comic book business since 1939. Lee always wanted to be a writer, and he began by writing comic book text filler. Later, he wrote features and became an editor before he was 20. According to Lee, he had been trying to develop a superhero who also needed to deal with the normal problems of daily life. He presented his idea to his boss, Martin Goodman. Lee maintains that Goodman thought Spider-Man was a terrible idea. Lee claims he asked artist Jack Kirby to illustrate his plot line, but later reassigned the job to artist Steve Ditko. Lee liked Ditko's stylized approach. The comic strip was published in 1962 and it became a huge success. Others, however, have called Lee's version of events into question. In the book Stan Lee and the Rise and Fall of the American Comic Book, authors Jordan Raphael and Tom Spurgeon take a different viewpoint. They claim that the original Spider-Man was the result of the work of several artists and writers. Stan Lee wanted to create a spider superhero, but artist Jack Kirby also wanted to draw an insect superhero. Raphael and Spurgeon explained Stan Lee expressed the desire to do a teenage superhero using the spider motif. Jack Kirby had long wanted to do an insect-related superhero. Kirby started to put together a slightly different version of the tale. He rejected some of the more fantastic Lee story elements, instead adding a kindly aunt and uncle and giving the superhero a secret origin revolving around a neighbor who happened to be a scientist. All right. The character of Spider-Man was eventually given to artist Steve Ditko. He worked from a story summary and Kirby's ideas, and eventually he created the drawing of Spider-Man and Peter Parker with bottle-thick glasses, slumped shoulders, and a homemade costume. Ditko was nearly as sharp as Kirby when it came to shaping characters in ways that would make them effective on the page. The Spider-Man millions of readers came to know and love got his youth and voice from Stan Lee and his human frailty from Steve Ditko. And the first cover drawing of Spider-Man was drawn by Jack Kirby. According to Raphael and Spurgeon, Lee often built on contributions from other artists. Comic book publishers tried to produce as many books as possible in a short amount of time, and Lee encouraged everyone to contribute. As more writers and artists were hired, everyone shared ideas. Later, legal and financial questions arose regarding who actually created which comic book character. But during the early 1960s, superhero comic books flourished through this collaborative process. So this is the second version. Okay. So this one was a biography telling about the Spider-Man existence, how it came about. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and answer the questions. How does the author's purpose for writing the first article, Stan Lee and Spider-Man, differ from the author's purpose for writing The Birth of Spider-Man? All right, so we're going to look at the options. So as we can see in the first story, before we even look at the questions, we know that in the first story, I can tell that the author was doing some kind of describing. The author was trying to describe Stan Lee's thinking about Spider-Man. And in the second story, the author was trying to explain something. It was trying to explain the different versions of Spider-Man. So let's see. So two purposes. One, the first one was to describe and the second one to explain. So let's look at our options. A, the first author describes Stan Lee's version of the creation of Spider-Man. The second explains that there are different versions of how Spider-Man was created. So we see describe, we see explains, okay? So this could be a possible answer. Let's move on. Because the first article focuses on Stan Lee and his involvement in the creation of Spider-Man. And the author includes Lee's point of view about the events. And in the second article, it includes other points of views and different versions of the same event. So A could be a possible answer. Let's look at B. The first author wants readers to understand why Stan Lee is so popular. The second wants the reader to understand why Spider-Man is so popular. Well, choice B is incorrect because neither article focuses on the popularity of Stan Lee or Spider-Man. They are about the history of the character. So B is out. And C, the first author wants the reader to reflect on Stan Lee's point of view. The second wants readers to reflect on facts about Stan Lee's career. So choice C is not the best choice because the second article does not include many details about Lee's career. And D, the first author wants to describe Stan Lee's vision of Spider-Man. The second wants to describe Jack Kirby's vision of Spider-Man. So D is incorrect because the second article includes more points of view than Jack Kirby's. So A is actually our most suitable answer. What did both authors want the reader to understand about Martin Goodman and the creation of the Spider-Man character? Okay, so A, Martin Goodman headed the team who developed the Spider-Man concept. So choice A is incorrect because this is not supported by any evidence in the text. And Martin Goodman was Stan Lee's boss. But there are no details in either text to suggest that he developed the character or respected. Okay, it didn't show that he developed the character. All right, so let's cross that one. B, Martin Goodman respected Stan Lee's decision as a writer. Also, this one is incorrect because there's no evidence that he respected Stan Lee. Let's look at C. Martin Goodman shaped the characters to make him effective on the page. So C is also incorrect because there's no evidence of this in the text. So our most suitable answer is D. Martin Goodman didn't deserve credit for the creation of Spider-Man. And the first article says that Goodman hated Lee's idea and felt that a superhero couldn't be a teenager with personal problems. And the second article also says that Goodman thought Spider-Man was a terrible idea. Yes, so let's continue to our written response. Well, we have one more question. What fact appears in both articles? A, Martin Goodman felt that the name Spider-Man was a terrible choice. So choice A is incorrect because Goodman hated the entire idea of Spider-Man, not just the name. So B, Spider-Man was probably the result of several writers' ideas. All right, so choice B is also incorrect because this only appeared in the second article. This was not mentioned in the first article. Let's look at C. Steve Ditko created the art for the character of Spider-Man. Was this a fact in both of the articles? So choice C, the fact appears in, so if we can look back in the first article, let's see. In the first article, it says Lee assigned the project to Steve Ditko. So that's a fact. And let's look at the next article in chapter. Let me see, paragraph 4. Lee claims that he asked Jack Kirby to illustrate. So this looks like it can be a fact that is presented in both articles. Okay, so Steve Ditko, right? And then look at paragraph 4. He then reassigned the job to Steve Ditko after he had asked Jack Kirby, and he didn't like his illustration, right? So that's a fact. That answer could be correct. Steve Ditko created the art for the character of Spider-Man. Let's look at the next one. Jack Kirby also wanted to create a superhero that looked like an insect. So this answer only appeared in the second article, so it didn't appear in both. So this one is our most suitable answer, C. So number 4, compare and contrast the way the two authors present information about Spider in these articles. Describe similarities and differences in the author's purpose, their points of view, and the facts they choose. Use at least 4 details from the articles to support your response. So we can see that both articles tell about the creation of the comic book character Spider-Man. The first article explains Stan Lee's version of how he came to create the character. The author quotes from Lee's own memoir to describe how ideas about the character came to him over time, right? So the second article claims that the Spider-Man character was a result of the collaboration of many artists, as much from Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko as from Stan Lee. Some information in the second article contradicts what Lee wrote in his memoir. The second author writes that Spider-Man got his youth and voice from Stan Lee, but his human frailty from Steve Ditko. The author describing Lee's memoir suggests that Lee himself was a key force behind creating the popular hero. So we can go ahead and type our response, or we can record our response. And then you hit start recording to record. So both articles tell about the creation of the comic book character Spider-Man. The first article explains Stan Lee's version of how he came to create the character. The author quotes from Lee's own memoir to describe how ideas about the character came to him over time. The second article claims that the Spider-Man character was a result of the collaboration of many artists, as much from Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko as from Stan Lee. Some information in the second article contradicts what Lee wrote in his memoir. The second author writes that Spider-Man got his youth and voice from Stan Lee, but his human frailty from Steve Ditko. The author describing Lee's memoir suggests that Lee himself was the key force behind creating the popular hero. So you're going to stop and save. And here is your recording to your answer. So you have 2 options, to record or to type your response. Okay, boys and girls, thank you for your hard work and dedication during this lesson. Now it's time for a small group activity. And during small group, you'll be working on comparing two texts, a memorial vision and Maya Lin original proposal. So you'll be given the printed out copy or the paper version, or you can continue on ClassKit to answer the questions to these two stories. Okay. Remember, while you're working in the small group, you should not interrupt the teacher, and you should work quietly in your small group. Okay. So while you're working, I will be assisting another group at my table. Once you're finished, you'll do News ELA, Imperialism and Resistance Shape the Modern World. That's a part of your social studies activity, and you'll be provided with a printout of that material or resource, and you have to answer the questions. You'll also need to complete Common Lit. You can click on the link or just log into Common Lit, and you're working on the story Ghost Moon Part 2, Journey into the Junk Moon. And once you have completed your activity and submitted it, I will receive the scores. Then you'll do Nearpod. Afterwards, you'll do our chapter book 2 Roads, and we're on chapter 10, so you can click on the link to listen to the story being read, or you can simply read cover copy of the book. Okay.
Chapter 10.
And once you're finished, remember you're supposed to complete your reflection and provide your feedback. So you do your student reflection. So thank you, boys and girls, for tuning in. Please remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and turn on the post notification bell. Once again, everyone, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also, turn on the post notification bell. Please be on the lookout for other videos. See you next time.